Hiroshi Tanaka walked slowly toward the big stage. His small feet made quiet sounds on the shiny floor of Carnegie Hall. The 8-year-old boy looked very tiny next to the huge black piano that sat in the middle of the stage. The piano was bigger than anything he had ever seen before. It was much bigger than the old piano at his home in Japan. The boy carried a small bag with his sheet music inside. The bag was old and worn out. His mother had made it for him from old cloth. She had sewn it by hand with love and care. Hiroshi held the bag close to his chest like it was something very precious. Inside were the music sheets that his grandmother had written for him. She had copied them by hand because they could not buy the printed ones. Behind the stage, many other children were waiting for their turn to play. These children looked very different from Hiroshi. They wore expensive clothes and shiny shoes. Their hair was perfectly done. They carried beautiful cases made of leather. Their music sheets were new and clean. Some of them had their own piano teachers with them. These teachers wore nice suits and spoke in loud voices about their students. Hiroshi looked down at his own clothes. His shirt was clean, but it was not new. His mother had washed it many times. She had ironed it carefully that morning before he left for the competition. His shoes were polished, but they were old. They were the only good shoes he owned. His father had bought them for him 2 years ago when he first started taking piano lessons. The boy remembered how he got to this place. It had taken him and his mother 2 days to travel from their small village in Japan to New York City. They had never been on an airplane before. They had never been to America before. They had saved money for 3 years to make this trip possible. His mother worked extra hours at the factory. His father worked extra hours at the farm. Even his grandmother helped by selling vegetables from her garden. The village where Hiroshi lived was very small. Most people there were farmers or worked in small shops. Not many people knew about classical music. There was no music school in the village. There was no piano teacher. The only piano in the whole village was the old one that belonged to his grandmother. She had bought it many years ago when she was young. His grandmother was the one who first taught him to play. She was not a real piano teacher. She had learned to play when she was a little girl. Her own mother had taught her some simple songs. But grandmother had a gift for music. She could hear a song once and then play it on the piano. She could make beautiful music even though she never went to music school. When Hiroshi was 4 years old, he heard his grandmother playing the old piano. The music made him feel something special inside his heart. He asked her to teach him. At first she said he was too young, but he kept asking every day. Finally she said yes. She started teaching him simple songs. She was surprised at how quickly he learned. By the time Hiroshi was 6 years old, he could play music that was much harder than what other children his age could play. His grandmother knew that he had a special gift. She had never seen anyone learn music so fast. She decided to teach him more difficult pieces. She found old music books and copied the notes by hand for him. News about the talented boy spread through the village. People came to listen to him play. They had never heard such beautiful music before. Some people cried when they heard him play sad songs. Some people smiled when he played happy songs. Everyone said that Hiroshi had magic in his fingers. One day, a man from the city came to visit the village. He heard people talking about the boy who could play piano like an angel. He asked to hear Hiroshi play. After listening for just 5 minutes, the man was amazed. He told Hiroshi's family that the boy should compete in big competitions. He said that Hiroshi was good enough to play with the best young musicians in the world. The man told them about a competition in America. It was for young piano players from all over the world. The best players would win prizes and scholarships. They could study music at the best schools. But the competition cost a lot of money to enter. The family would need to pay for airplane tickets, hotels, and food. Hiroshi's family talked about it for many nights. They wanted to give him this chance. But they did not have enough money. That is when the whole village decided to help. Everyone gave what they could. The rice farmer gave money from selling his rice. The shop owner gave money from his savings. Even the children gave coins from their piggy banks. It took 2 years to save enough money. During this time, Hiroshi kept practicing every day. His grandmother found more difficult music for him to learn. She taught him pieces by famous composers like Mozart, Beethoven, and Chopin. She told him stories about these great musicians. She helped him understand the feelings in their music. Now Hiroshi was standing on the stage in Carnegie Hall. This was the most famous concert hall in America. Many great musicians had played on this same stage. The boy felt scared but also excited. He had dreamed about this moment for 2 years. In the audience, people were talking and looking at their programs. They were waiting to hear the young musicians play. Most of them were parents of the other children. They had expensive cameras ready to take pictures. They wore nice clothes and jewelry. Many of them lived in New York City. They were used to hearing good music. The judges sat at a long table in front of the stage. There were 5 judges in total. All of them were famous musicians or music teachers. They had judged many competitions before. They knew what good music sounded like. They were looking for the best young talent in the world. Hiroshi looked at the judges and then at the audience. So many people were going to listen to him play. In his village, only 20 or 30 people would come to hear him. Here there were hundreds of people. The thought made his hands shake a little bit. He took a deep breath and tried to remember what his grandmother had told him. She had said, "When you play music, do not think about the people watching you. Think about the music itself. Let the music speak through your fingers. Let your heart guide your hands. If you play with love, people will feel that love too." The boy walked closer to the piano. Soon it would be his turn to play. He did not know that some people in the audience were already looking at him with doubt. He did not know that some judges were wondering why such a small boy from so far away had come to compete. He only knew that he loved music more than anything else in the world. And he was ready to share that love with everyone who would listen. The contest organizer called Hiroshi's name. His voice echoed through the big hall. "Next we have Hiroshi Tanaka from Japan. He is 8 years old." The man looked at his paper and then looked surprised. He read the name again to make sure he had it right. Hiroshi walked to the center of the stage. His small legs felt shaky. The bright lights made everything look different. He could not see the audience very well because the lights were so bright. But he could hear them talking. Some people were whispering to each other. The contest organizer asked Hiroshi what piece he would play. The boy spoke into the microphone. His voice was quiet and gentle. "I will play Piano Concerto No. 2 by Rachmaninoff," he said. His English was not perfect. He had been practicing the words for weeks. When the judges heard this, they looked at each other with wide eyes. Judge Richardson, who was sitting in the middle, started to smile. Then he started to laugh quietly. The other judges began to smile too. They tried to cover their mouths, but people could see they were amused. Piano Concerto No. 2 by Rachmaninoff was one of the hardest pieces in the world. Even grown-up piano players found it very difficult. The piece was long and complex. It required great skill and strength. Most professional pianists practiced for months before they could play it well. Some never learned to play it at all. Judge Richardson leaned back in his chair. He was a famous piano teacher from New York. He had taught many great pianists. He had judged hundreds of competitions. He had never seen a child so young try to play such a difficult piece. He thought it was funny that this small boy believed he could do it. The judge whispered to the woman sitting next to him. "This should be interesting," he said with a big smile. "I wonder if he even knows how hard this piece is." The woman giggled quietly. She was Judge Martinez, a famous concert pianist. She had played in the best concert halls around the world. Judge Martinez whispered back, "Maybe he confused it with a different piece. Maybe he meant to say something easier." She looked at Hiroshi with a kind but doubtful expression. Poor little boy. He has no idea what he's gotten himself into. The third judge, Professor Williams, shook his head slowly. He taught music at a famous university. He had written books about piano music. He knew that Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto took most students years to learn properly. Even then, only the very best could play it well. "I hope he doesn't cry when he realizes he can't do it," Professor Williams whispered to the others. "Children this age usually pick simple pieces. Mary Had a Little Lamb or Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star. This is just unrealistic." The fourth judge was Mrs. Chen, a piano teacher from California. She taught many talented children. She was usually very kind and encouraging, but even she found it hard not to smile at what she saw as a child's innocent mistake. "Maybe we should stop him now," she whispered. "Save him from embarrassment." The fifth judge, Mr. Johnson, was younger than the others. He was a professional pianist who also taught at a music school. He tried to keep an open mind, but he also found it hard to believe that such a young child could handle such a difficult piece. "Well," he said quietly, "at least it will be over quickly. In the audience, people had heard what piece Hiroshi was going to play. Word spread quickly through the rows of seats. Parents turned to each other with surprised looks on their faces. Some of them were musicians themselves. They knew how hard Rachmaninoff could be. "Did he say Rachmaninoff?" asked one woman in the front row. She was the mother of a 12-year-old contestant. Her daughter had been taking piano lessons for 6 years. Even her daughter would never try such a difficult piece. "He must be confused," said the man sitting next to her. "He was a music professor at a local college. Maybe English is not his first language and he got mixed up. Someone should probably help him choose something more appropriate." A few rows back, some teenagers were sitting with their parents. They were also in the competition. They had been playing piano for many years. When they heard that Hiroshi was going to play Rachmaninoff, they started to whisper and point. "Is he serious?" asked a 15-year-old girl named Sarah. She was considered one of the best young pianists in her state. She had won many competitions, but even she would not dare to try Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto yet. Her teacher had told her to wait until she was older and stronger. "Maybe it's a joke," said a boy named Michael. He was 14 and had been playing piano since he was 5. "Maybe he's going to play a simplified version. You know, like the easy arrangements they make for beginners." The parents in the audience began to feel sorry for Hiroshi. They could see that he was serious about his choice. They thought someone should have guided him better. They thought his teacher should have chosen a more suitable piece for him. "Someone should have prepared him better," said one father. "It's not fair to let a child fail like this in front of so many people." "Where are his parents?" asked another woman. "Why did they let him choose something so impossible?" What the audience did not know was that Hiroshi's mother was sitting in the very back of the hall. She had bought the cheapest ticket she could find. She was wearing her best dress, but it was still simple compared to what other people were wearing. She could see her son on the stage, but she could not hear what people were saying about him. Hiroshi's mother was nervous but proud. She remembered all the hours her son had practiced. She remembered how he would play the same difficult parts over and over until he got them right. She had watched him learn this piece note by note. She knew that her grandmother had worked very hard to teach him every detail. Back on the stage, Hiroshi could feel that something was different. He could sense that people were surprised by his choice. He could hear the quiet laughter and whispers. But he did not understand why people were reacting this way. In his village, when he told people he was going to play Rachmaninoff, they were excited and proud. They did not know how difficult the piece was. They just knew it sounded beautiful when Hiroshi played it. They trusted that he could do whatever he set his mind to. The boy looked at the piano. It was so much bigger and more beautiful than his grandmother's old piano at home. The keys looked perfect and shiny. He wondered if it would sound different from what he was used to. He had only practiced on the old piano in his village. Judge Richardson cleared his throat and spoke into his microphone. "Well, young man," he said with amusement in his voice, "we're ready when you are. Please go ahead and show us what you can do." His tone was polite, but it was clear he did not expect much. The other judges settled back in their chairs. They were prepared to listen patiently and then gently explain to the boy why he should choose easier music. They had already decided how they would handle the situation. They would be kind but honest. They would encourage him to keep studying and try again when he was older. Some people in the audience took out their phones. They thought it might be amusing to record what was about to happen. They expected to see a child struggle with music that was too hard for him. They thought it might make a funny video to share with friends later, but a few people in the audience felt different. There was something about the boy's calm confidence that made them curious. There was something in his eyes that suggested he knew exactly what he was doing. These people decided to give him a chance before making judgments. An elderly man in the third row leaned forward in his seat. He had been a music teacher for 50 years. He had learned to never underestimate young talent. "Let's see what this boy can do," he whispered to his wife. "Sometimes the biggest surprises come in the smallest packages." Hiroshi walked toward the piano bench. The moment of truth was coming. Soon everyone would know if their laughter was justified, or if they were about to witness something extraordinary. Hiroshi reached the piano and stopped for a moment. The beautiful black instrument looked like a sleeping giant. Its lid was open, showing the strings inside. The boy had never seen a piano so perfect and shiny. At home, his grandmother's piano had scratches and worn keys. Some of the keys made different sounds than they should. But this piano looked like it had never been touched. The piano bench was too high for Hiroshi. His feet would not touch the floor when he sat down. This was a problem he had never faced before. At home, his grandmother had put books under his feet so he could reach the pedals properly. Here there were no books. A stage helper noticed the problem. He brought a special footstool and placed it under the piano. Now Hiroshi could sit properly and reach the pedals with his feet. The boy smiled and said thank you in his quiet voice. The helper smiled back, but Hiroshi could see doubt in the man's eyes too. Hiroshi sat down on the bench and adjusted his position. He moved the bench a little closer to the piano. Then he moved it back a little. He wanted everything to be perfect. His grandmother had taught him that the right position was very important. If your body is not comfortable, your music will not be comfortable either, she always said. The boy looked down at his hands. They were very small compared to the piano keys. Most piano players had long fingers and big hands. Hiroshi's hands were still the hands of a child. But his grandmother had taught him how to use his small hands in smart ways. She showed him how to move quickly and smoothly between the keys. He placed his hands gently on the keys but did not press them yet. He felt the smooth surface under his fingers. The keys were perfectly balanced. They would move easily when he touched them. This was very different from his grandmother's piano, where some keys were hard to press and others were too loose. The audience became quiet. Even the people who had been laughing stopped talking. They wanted to see what would happen next. Some people felt a little sorry for the boy. They thought he was about to embarrass himself in front of hundreds of people. Judge Richardson looked at his watch. He was thinking about the other contestants who were waiting. He wanted to give Hiroshi a fair chance, but he also did not want to waste too much time. He believed the boy would realize very quickly that the piece was too hard for him. Hiroshi closed his eyes and took a deep breath. In his mind, he traveled back to his village. He could see his grandmother sitting next to him at the old piano. He could hear her gentle voice teaching him the music. She had spent months helping him learn every note of this piece. Remember, his grandmother had said, this music tells a story. It is not just notes on a paper. Rachmaninoff was thinking about love and sadness and hope when he wrote it. You must feel these things too when you play. The boy remembered how his grandmother explained each part of the piece. The beginning was like a person walking alone in the dark. The person was sad and lost. But then the music changed. It became stronger and more hopeful. It was like the sun coming up after a long night. Hiroshi opened his eyes and looked at the piano keys again. He knew exactly which keys to press first. He had practiced the opening so many times that his fingers remembered every movement. His grandmother always said that the opening was the most important part. If you start well, the rest will follow, she told him. In the audience, people were starting to feel a little uncomfortable. The boy was taking a long time to begin. Some people thought maybe he was realizing that he had made a mistake. Maybe he was too scared to play. Maybe he would ask to change to an easier piece. But Hiroshi was not scared. He was preparing his mind and heart for the music. His grandmother had taught him to do this before every performance. Take time to connect with the music, she said. Let it come into your heart before it comes out of your fingers. The boy thought about all the people who had helped him get to this place. He thought about his mother working extra hours at the factory. He thought about his father working late on the farm. He thought about the whole village saving money to send him here. He thought about his grandmother's patient teaching and endless love. Most of all, he thought about the music itself. Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 was one of the most beautiful pieces ever written. It had magic in it. When played well, it could make people cry with joy. It could make them feel things they had never felt before. Hiroshi had fallen in love with this piece the first time his grandmother played it for him. She had an old recording of a famous pianist playing it. The sound was scratchy and unclear, but the boy could hear the beauty underneath. He had asked his grandmother to teach it to him. At first, his grandmother said no. She said it was too difficult. She said he should wait until he was older. But Hiroshi asked every day for weeks. Finally, she agreed to try. She said they would learn it very slowly, one small part at a time. It took them 8 months to learn the whole piece. Some parts were so hard that Hiroshi had to practice them for weeks before he could play them correctly. His fingers would get tired and sometimes hurt. But he never gave up. He loved the music too much to quit. Now sitting in Carnegie Hall, Hiroshi felt ready. He had practiced this piece thousands of times. He knew every note, every rhythm, every feeling that went with each part. The music was not just something he had learned. It had become part of who he was. The boy positioned his hands over the keys one more time. His right hand was ready to play the melody. His left hand was ready to play the bass notes. His feet were positioned over the pedals. Everything was perfect. In the judging area, Judge Richardson was getting impatient. He looked at the other judges and shrugged his shoulders. He was ready to stop the boy and suggest an easier piece, but Judge Martinez put her hand on his arm and shook her head. "Let him try," she whispered. "We should at least give him a chance." The elderly man in the third row leaned even further forward. He had a feeling that something special was about to happen. His wife noticed his excitement and looked at him with curiosity. "What is it?" she whispered. "I don't know," he replied. "But something about this boy feels different." Hiroshi's mother, sitting in the back of the hall, felt her heart beating fast. She could see her son sitting at the piano, but she was too far away to see his face clearly. She said a silent prayer for him. She asked for strength and courage for her little boy. The hall became completely silent. Even the people who had been whispering stopped talking. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Some people expected failure. Others hoped for the best. A few people had no expectations at all. They were just curious. Hiroshi felt the silence around him. It was like the calm before a storm. In a few seconds, the hall would be filled with music. But right now, it was perfectly quiet. The boy took one last deep breath and let his fingers find their starting positions. The moment had arrived. After 2 years of dreaming, months of saving money, days of traveling, and hours of waiting, Hiroshi was finally ready to share his gift with the world. He was ready to show everyone that music has no boundaries. He was ready to prove that talent can come from anywhere, even from a small village far away. The boy pressed the first key. The first note rang out clear and strong. It filled the entire hall with perfect sound. The note was exactly right, not too soft, not too loud, but perfectly balanced. It hung in the air for just the right amount of time before the second note joined it. Judge Richardson's smile disappeared instantly. His eyes opened wide with surprise. That first note was not what he had expected at all. It was not the weak, uncertain sound of a child trying to play music too difficult for him. It was the confident, beautiful sound of someone who truly understood the music. The second note came, then the third. Each note was perfect. Hiroshi's fingers moved across the keys with grace and precision. His small hands seemed to know exactly where to go. There was no hesitation, no mistakes, no signs that he was struggling with the difficult music. Judge Martinez sat up straight in her chair. She had played this same piece many times in her career. She knew how hard it was. She knew that even professional pianists sometimes made mistakes in the opening measures. But this 8-year-old boy was playing it flawlessly. The melody began to develop. Hiroshi's right hand played the beautiful main theme, while his left hand provided the supporting bass notes. The two hands worked together perfectly, like dancers who had practiced together for years. Each finger moved independently, creating a rich, complex sound. Professor Williams rubbed his eyes as if he could not believe what he was seeing. He had taught piano for 30 years. He had heard thousands of students play. He thought he knew what children this age could and could not do. But Hiroshi was proving him wrong with every note. In the audience, the quiet laughter had stopped completely. People who had been smiling now looked serious and amazed. The woman in the front row who had been making jokes about the boy's choice was now leaning forward with her mouth open. She could not believe what she was hearing. The music continued to flow from Hiroshi's fingers. He was not just playing the notes correctly. He was bringing them to life. Each phrase had feeling and meaning. The sad parts sounded truly sad. The hopeful parts filled the hall with light and joy. It was as if the boy understood every emotion that Rachmaninoff had put into the music. Mrs. Chen, the fourth judge, felt tears starting to form in her eyes. She had been teaching children for 20 years. She thought she had heard every level of talent possible, but she had never heard a child play with such maturity and understanding. It was like listening to a master musician trapped in a child's body. The technical difficulty of the piece was becoming more obvious as Hiroshi continued to play. His hands had to stretch across many keys at once. His fingers had to move at incredible speed. Some parts required great strength to create the powerful, dramatic sounds that Rachmaninoff wanted. But Hiroshi handled every challenge with ease. When the music called for gentle, soft sounds, his touch became light as a feather. When it called for strong, bold sounds, he pressed the keys with perfect force. His small hands seemed to have the power and control of much larger hands. Mr. Johnson, the youngest judge, was shaking his head in disbelief. He was only 30 years old, but he had already performed in many famous concert halls around the world. He knew how much practice and skill were needed to play at this level. How could a child from a small village have learned to play so well? The teenagers in the audience who had been making fun of Hiroshi were now silent. Sarah, the 15-year-old who had called his choice a joke, felt embarrassed about what she had said. She realized that this boy could play better than she could, even though she was older and had been studying longer. Michael, the 14-year-old boy, felt inspired and humbled at the same time. He had always thought he was pretty good at piano, but listening to Hiroshi made him realize how much more he needed to learn. This boy was showing him what true musical talent looked like. The parents in the audience were having their own reactions. Many of them had spent thousands of dollars on piano lessons for their children. They had bought expensive pianos and hired the best teachers they could find. Yet their children could not play like this 8-year-old boy with his simple clothes and worn music bag. Some parents felt amazed and inspired. They realized they were witnessing something very special. Others felt a little jealous or confused. How was it possible that a child from such humble circumstances could be so gifted? But as the music continued, most people stopped thinking about comparisons and competitions. They were being drawn into the beauty of what they were hearing. Hiroshi's playing was so expressive and moving that it touched their hearts directly. The elderly man in the third row had tears streaming down his face. In his 50 years of teaching, he had always believed that music was a universal language that could speak to anyone. Hiroshi was proving that belief in the most beautiful way possible. On stage, Hiroshi seemed to be in his own world. His eyes were closed part of the time, and when they were open, he seemed to be looking beyond the audience to something only he could see. He was completely focused on the music, unaware of the amazement he was creating in the hall. The boy's face showed deep concentration, but also joy. He loved this music with all his heart. Every note he played was a gift he was sharing with the world. He had practiced for so long and worked so hard to be able to play it perfectly. Now finally he was able to share it with people who could truly appreciate it. His grandmother had always told him that music was meant to be shared. Music that stays locked inside one person is like a flower that never blooms, she would say. When you play for others, you let the music bloom and spread its beauty to everyone who hears it. As the first movement of the concerto continued, the technical challenges became even greater. There were rapid scales that required incredible finger speed. There were jumps across the keyboard that needed perfect timing. There were complex rhythms that could confuse even experienced musicians. But Hiroshi met every challenge with confidence and skill. His technique was not just correct, it was elegant and beautiful to watch. His hands moved like water flowing over rocks, smooth and natural despite the complexity of what they were doing. Judge Richardson found himself leaning forward in his chair. He had completely forgotten about his earlier skepticism. He was now watching and listening with the fascination of someone witnessing a miracle. How could this be possible? Where had this child learned to play like this? The judge began to think about all the assumptions he had made. He had judged Hiroshi based on his appearance, his age, and his background. He had decided the boy would fail before giving him a real chance. Now he was learning a lesson about the danger of making quick judgments. The transformation in the hall was complete. What had started as a scene of doubt and amusement had become a moment of wonder and respect. The small boy from Japan had taken control of the room not through words or force, but through the pure power of his musical gift. As the first movement neared its end, everyone in Carnegie Hall realized they were experiencing something they would never forget. They were witnessing the emergence of a true musical genius, and they were among the first people in the world to discover him. As Hiroshi moved into the second movement of the concerto, something even more remarkable became clear. He was not just playing the notes correctly or even beautifully. He was interpreting the music with a depth of understanding that seemed impossible for someone his age. The second movement of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2 is known for its incredible beauty and emotional power. It requires the pianist to tell a story without words, to make the listener feel deep emotions through sound alone. This is something that usually takes years of life experience to master. But as Hiroshi's fingers found the opening notes of the second movement, it became clear that he understood exactly what story the music was trying to tell. His playing became softer and more intimate. The hall filled with sounds that were gentle and loving, like a mother singing a lullaby to her child. Judge Martinez closed her eyes and let the music wash over her. She had performed this movement many times, but she had never heard it played with such pure emotion. The boy was not just playing notes on a page. He was sharing feelings from deep in his heart. The melody that Hiroshi played seemed to float through the air. Each note was perfectly shaped and timed. When the music called for silence between notes, those silences were just as beautiful as the sounds themselves. The boy understood that in music, what you don't play is just as important as what you do play. Professor Williams was making notes on his paper, but his hand had stopped moving. He was supposed to be judging technical accuracy and musical interpretation, but what he was hearing went beyond anything his judging criteria could measure. This was artistry of the highest level. In the audience, people were experiencing emotions they had not expected to feel. Some were remembering loved ones who had passed away. Others were thinking about their hopes and dreams. The music was reaching into their hearts and bringing out feelings they had forgotten they had. A businessman in the fifth row found himself thinking about his daughter, who lived far away. He had not spoken to her in months because they had argued about something silly. The beauty of Hiroshi's playing made him realize how much he missed her. He decided he would call her as soon as the concert ended. An elderly woman near the back of the hall was reminded of her late husband. They had danced to this music on their wedding night 50 years ago. As she listened to Hiroshi play, she could almost feel her husband's arms around her again. The boy's music was bringing back the most precious memories of her life. The technical mastery that Hiroshi was displaying became even more impressive as the movement continued. There were passages that required him to play very fast runs with his right hand, while maintaining a steady singing melody with his left hand. Both hands had to be completely independent, doing different things at the same time. Most adult pianists found this coordination very difficult, but Hiroshi made it look effortless. His left hand sang the melody with perfect expression, while his right hand danced through the complicated runs with precision and grace. Mrs. Chen was watching Hiroshi's hands very carefully. As a piano teacher, she knew how much practice was required to develop this level of coordination. She estimated that it would take most students 10 years of serious study to reach this point. How had this 8-year-old boy managed to learn so much so quickly? The emotional climax of the second movement was approaching. This was the most challenging part for any pianist, not because of technical difficulty, but because of the emotional demands. The music builds to a moment of incredible beauty and power, then fades away into gentle sadness. Hiroshi seemed to understand exactly how to shape this climax. He built the intensity gradually, never rushing or forcing the music. When the moment of greatest power arrived, his playing filled the hall with sound that was both strong and beautiful. Then, as the music called for it, he let the power fade away into the most tender, gentle sounds. The audience was completely silent. Many people were crying, though they could not explain exactly why. The music was touching something deep inside them, something beyond words or thoughts. It was as if Hiroshi was speaking directly to their souls. Mr. Johnson was trying to understand what he was witnessing. He had studied music theory and analysis for years. He could explain technically what Hiroshi was doing, but the emotional impact of the performance was beyond analysis. This was music making at its purest and most powerful. As the second movement came to its quiet ending, the hall remained in perfect silence. No one wanted to break the spell that Hiroshi had created. The last note faded away slowly, and still no one moved or made a sound. Then Hiroshi began the third movement, and the hall came alive with new energy. The third movement is fast and exciting, full of technical challenges and brilliant displays of skill. If the second movement had shown Hiroshi's emotional maturity, the third movement would show his technical mastery. His fingers flew across the keyboard with incredible speed and accuracy. Complex passages that would challenge any professional pianist poured out effortlessly. His hands moved so fast they almost seemed to blur, but every note was perfectly clear and in place. The judges were no longer just amazed. They were speechless. Judge Richardson had stopped taking notes entirely. He was watching Hiroshi with the expression of someone seeing a miracle. In his 40 years of judging competitions, he had never seen anything like this. The audience was now fully caught up in the excitement of the music. The third movement had dramatic moments that made people gasp with surprise. It had playful moments that made them smile. It had powerful moments that made them feel like they could conquer the world. But throughout all the technical fireworks and emotional drama, Hiroshi never seemed to be showing off or trying to impress anyone. He was simply sharing the music that he loved. His playing was not about proving how good he was. It was about giving a gift to everyone who was listening. Sarah, the 15-year-old contestant who had initially doubted Hiroshi, was now watching him with complete admiration. She realized that she had been thinking about music in the wrong way. She had been focused on winning competitions and impressing judges. But Hiroshi was showing her that music was really about sharing beauty and emotion with others. The businessman who had thought about calling his daughter was now certain he would do it. Hiroshi's music had reminded him that life was too short to waste on silly arguments. The beauty that this young boy was creating made everything else seem less important. As the concerto neared its spectacular ending, everyone in Carnegie Hall knew they were witnessing something historic. This was not just a good performance by a talented child. This was the emergence of a true musical genius, someone who might change the world of classical music forever. Hiroshi built toward the final climax with perfect timing and control. The music became bigger and more exciting with each measure. His small hands commanded the piano like a master, drawing out every bit of power and beauty the instrument could produce. The last few measures arrived with explosive energy. Hiroshi's hands moved across the entire keyboard, creating sounds that filled every corner of the hall. The final chord rang out with perfect timing and power, bringing the greatest piano concerto ever written to a magnificent conclusion. Then, for a moment that seemed to last forever, the hall was completely silent. The silence that followed Hiroshi's final chord was unlike anything anyone in Carnegie Hall had ever experienced. It was not the silence of confusion or disappointment. It was the silence of people who had just witnessed something so beautiful and perfect that they needed a moment to let it sink into their hearts. In that moment of perfect quiet, the transformation of the audience was complete. The same people who had entered the hall with doubts and skepticism were now sitting in stunned amazement. Their minds were struggling to process what they had just heard. How is it possible that such incredible music had come from such a small, humble boy? The elderly man in the third row was the first to understand what had happened. Tears were streaming down his face as he realized he had just heard one of the greatest piano performances of his lifetime. In 50 years of listening to music, he had heard many famous pianists play this same piece. But none of them had moved him the way this 8-year-old boy had. His wife looked at him with concern. She had never seen her husband cry at a music performance before. "Are you all right?" she whispered. He could only nod and point toward the stage where Hiroshi sat quietly at the piano. "That boy," he whispered back. "That boy is a miracle." Throughout the hall, similar reactions were happening. People who had come expecting to hear amateur performances by young students were realizing they had just witnessed something extraordinary. Many of them worked in the music industry. They knew great playing when they heard it. And what they had just heard was not just great, it was legendary. A famous music critic who had been reviewing concerts for 30 years sat in the middle section with his mouth open. He had planned to write a short routine review of this youth competition. Now he knew he would have to completely rewrite his article. This was not just a competition story. This was the discovery of a new musical genius. The critic looked around at the other audience members. He could see the same amazement on their faces that he felt in his own heart. People were looking at each other with expressions that seemed to ask, "Did you hear what I just heard? Was that really as incredible as I think it was?" A professional pianist who taught at a nearby music school was shaking her head in disbelief. She had performed this same concerto with major orchestras. She knew every note, every challenge, every place where things could go wrong. She had watched Hiroshi navigate all of these challenges with perfect skill and deep understanding. "Impossible," she whispered to her husband. "What we just heard should be impossible. That level of technique takes 20 years to develop. That level of musical understanding usually comes only with a lifetime of experience. How can a child know so much about music and life?" Her husband, who was not a musician, could only respond with wonder. "I don't know how he did it," he said, "but I know what I felt. That music made me feel things I've never felt before. It was like he was speaking directly to my heart." Near the front of the hall, the parents of other contestants were having mixed emotions. They were amazed by what they had heard, but they were also worried about their own children. How could any of the other young pianists follow such an incredible performance? How could they compete with someone who played like a master musician? The mother of 12-year-old contestant named Emma was particularly affected. Emma had been taking piano lessons since she was 4 years old. The family had spent thousands of dollars on the best teachers and the finest piano. Emma was considered very talented for her age. But after hearing Hiroshi play, Emma's mother realized that her daughter's talent was ordinary compared to what they had just witnessed. She felt proud to have heard such incredible music, but also a little sad for her daughter, who would have to follow this amazing performance. Emma herself was watching from backstage with the other contestants. All of the young musicians were completely quiet. They had been nervous about their own performances, worrying about making mistakes or forgetting their music. Now they realized that their biggest challenge was not technical accuracy. It was trying to measure up to the standard that Hiroshi had just set. A 17-year-old pianist named David had been confident about winning the competition. He had won many contests before and was considered one of the best young pianists in the country. But as he listened to Hiroshi play, David realized he was hearing a level of artistry that he might never reach, no matter how hard he practiced. Instead of feeling jealous or discouraged, David felt inspired. He understood that he was witnessing greatness, and that should make him want to work harder and reach higher. Hiroshi was showing all of them what was possible when talent, hard work, and love of music came together perfectly. The stage crew members who had heard thousands of performances in Carnegie Hall were also amazed. They had helped set up concerts for some of the world's greatest musicians. They knew what exceptional playing sounded like. What they had just heard from this young boy was as good as anything they had ever experienced. One of the sound technicians was looking at his equipment to make sure it was working properly. The clarity and beauty of Hiroshi's playing had been so perfect that he wondered if there was something wrong with the sound system. But he realized that what he was hearing was simply the natural result of perfect technique and deep musical understanding. In the audience, several people had taken out their phones to record parts of the performance, but most of them had forgotten about their phones entirely. They were too caught up in the music to think about anything else. The few recordings that were made would become treasured possessions, though no recording could truly capture the magic of being in the hall during that performance. A young music student who was visiting from another country felt her entire understanding of piano playing change as she listened. She had been studying piano for 8 years and thought she knew what good playing sounded like. But Hiroshi was showing her levels of expression and technique that she had never imagined possible. The music teachers in the audience were perhaps the most affected of all. They understood better than anyone how much work and talent were required to reach this level. They knew that most of their students would never come close to playing this well, no matter how long they studied. But instead of feeling discouraged about their teaching, most of them felt inspired. Hiroshi was proving that incredible musical achievement was possible. He was showing that with the right combination of talent, dedication, and love, a student could reach heights that seemed impossible. A piano teacher named Mrs. Rodriguez had been teaching for 25 years. She had guided hundreds of students through their musical studies. She thought she understood the limits of what young people could achieve, but Hiroshi was forcing her to completely rethink those limits. "I need to go back to my students with new eyes," she thought to herself. "If this boy can play like this, maybe I'm not pushing my students hard enough. Maybe I'm not believing in them enough. Maybe there are possibilities I've never considered." Throughout the hall, people were having similar thoughts. Hiroshi's performance was not just entertaining them or impressing them. It was changing the way they thought about music, about talent, and about what human beings could achieve when they truly dedicated themselves to something they loved. The businessman, who had thought about calling his daughter, was now planning much more than a phone call. He was thinking about visiting her, about repairing their relationship, about not wasting any more time on things that didn't matter. The beauty of Hiroshi's music had reminded him of what was truly important in life. As the silence continued, people began to look around at each other. They could see the same amazement and emotion on other faces that they felt themselves. It was as if the entire audience had shared a profound experience together. They had all been touched by the same magic, moved by the same beauty. Slowly, people began to realize that the performance was over. Hiroshi was sitting quietly at the piano, his small hands resting in his lap. He seemed calm and peaceful, as if he had simply done what he came to do. He did not seem to understand the magnitude of what he had just accomplished. The moment of silence was about to break. The audience was about to respond to what they had heard, and when they did, it would be a response unlike anything Carnegie Hall had ever experienced before. The silence broke like a dam bursting. The elderly man in the third row was the first to stand up, his hands coming together in applause that seemed to come from the depths of his soul. His clapping was joined immediately by his wife, then by the people around them, and then by everyone in the entire hall. But this was not ordinary applause. This was an explosion of emotion that had been building during the entire performance. People were not just clapping, they were cheering, shouting, and crying all at the same time. The sound was so loud it seemed like the walls of Carnegie Hall might shake. Within seconds, every single person in the audience was on their feet. Rich and poor, young and old, musicians and non-musicians. Everyone was standing and applauding with an energy that seemed to come from somewhere beyond themselves. They had just witnessed something that would change their lives forever, and they needed to express the overwhelming emotions they felt. Judge Richardson stood up so quickly that his chair fell backward. Tears were streaming down his face as he clapped harder than he had ever clapped before. The same man who had been laughing at Hiroshi just an hour earlier was now overcome with emotion and shame. He had never been so wrong about anything in his life. The judge's applause was mixed with deep regret for his earlier behavior. He thought about how he had dismissed this incredible boy based on his appearance and age. He had almost missed the chance to witness one of the greatest musical performances he would ever hear. The thought made him clap even harder, as if his applause could somehow make up for his earlier doubt. Judge Martinez was applauding while openly weeping. As a professional pianist herself, she understood better than most people in the audience exactly what she had just heard. She knew that even among professional musicians, very few could play with the level of skill and artistry that Hiroshi had just demonstrated. "Bravo," she shouted above the applause. "Bravo!" Her voice was raw with emotion. She had performed in concert halls around the world, but she had never been moved by a performance the way this young boy had just moved her. Professor Williams was shaking his head as he applauded. He kept saying, "Impossible, impossible," but he was smiling through his tears. Everything he thought he knew about musical development and talent had been turned upside down. This boy had just proved that genius could appear anywhere, at any age, in any circumstances. Mrs. Chen was applauding while looking around at her fellow judges with an expression of amazement. They were all having the same reaction, complete astonishment mixed with deep respect. In all their years of judging competitions, they had never seen anything remotely close to what they had just witnessed. Mr. Johnson, the youngest judge, was jumping up and down as he clapped. His professional composure had completely disappeared. He was reacting like a fan at a rock concert, not like a serious classical music judge, but what he had just heard deserved that kind of passionate response. In the audience, the applause was getting louder instead of quieter. Usually applause starts strong and then fades away. But this applause seemed to be growing as people realized more and more what they had just experienced. It was as if the full impact of Hiroshi's performance was still sinking in. The music critic who had planned to write a routine review was applauding while frantically taking notes in his mind. He was already composing the article that would introduce Hiroshi to the world. He knew that his review would be one of the most important pieces he would ever write. Musical genius discovered at Carnegie Hall, he was thinking. 8-year-old Japanese pianist delivers performance for the ages. But even as he thought about the words he would use, he realized that no words could truly capture what had just happened. The professional pianist who taught at the music school was applauding while thinking about her students. She could not wait to tell them about what she had just heard. She wanted to inspire them with the story of this remarkable boy who had shown that anything was possible with enough dedication and love for music. Near the front of the hall, the parents of other contestants were applauding with mixed emotions. They were genuinely amazed by Hiroshi's performance, but they were also thinking about their own children. How could any of the remaining contestants follow such an incredible act? But as they continued to applaud, most of these parents realized that winning or losing the competition was no longer important. Their children had just witnessed greatness, and that was worth more than any prize. They would all go home with a memory that would inspire them for the rest of their lives. Backstage, the other young contestants were applauding just as enthusiastically as the audience. Despite the fact that Hiroshi had just made their own chances of winning very slim, they could not help but admire what they had heard. They understood that they had just witnessed something historic. Emma, the 12-year-old who was scheduled to perform next, was clapping while trying not to cry. She was nervous about following such an incredible performance, but she was also inspired. Hiroshi had shown her what was possible, and that made her want to do her absolute best. David, the 17-year-old who had been confident about winning, was applauding with genuine admiration. His competitive feelings had been completely replaced by respect and inspiration. He realized that being in the same competition as Hiroshi was an honor, regardless of the results. The stage crew members were also applauding from their positions around the hall. They had heard many great performances, but they knew they had just heard something special. Some of them were already talking about how they would remember this night for the rest of their lives. The applause continued for what seemed like an eternity. Usually, even the most enthusiastic applause lasts only a few minutes. But this response was lasting much longer. People seemed unable to stop expressing their amazement and gratitude for what they had just experienced. Hiroshi himself seemed surprised by the reaction. He had never received applause like this before. In his village, people had always been supportive and encouraging, but this was something completely different. He stood up from the piano bench and bowed politely as his grandmother had taught him to do. When the audience saw his humble bow, their applause became even louder. Here was this incredible young artist who had just delivered a performance that would have made professional musicians jealous, and he was responding with simple, polite gratitude. His humility made him even more impressive. Some people in the audience were shouting encore, encore. They wanted to hear Hiroshi play again. They could not believe that such an incredible experience was over. They wanted it to continue forever, but others were content to let the performance stand as it was. They understood that what they had just heard was perfect and complete. To ask for more might somehow diminish the magic of what had already happened. As the applause continued, people began to realize that they were not just applauding a performance. They were applauding the power of music itself. They were applauding the idea that beauty and greatness could come from anywhere. They were applauding the reminder that there was still magic in the world. The elderly man who had been the first to stand was still applauding with tears streaming down his face. His wife was holding his arm, but she was crying too. In 50 years of marriage, they had shared many beautiful experiences together. But this was something they would treasure for whatever time they had left. Judge Richardson was applauding while looking directly at Hiroshi with an expression of deep respect and regret. He wanted the boy to see his applause, to understand that he had completely changed his mind. The judge had learned a lesson about prejudice and assumptions that he would never forget. Finally, after what must have been 10 minutes, the applause began to slow down. People's hands were getting tired, but their hearts were still full. As the clapping gradually became quieter, the audience began to sit down, though many people remained standing for several more minutes. Even as the applause faded, the energy in the hall remained electric. People were looking at each other with expressions that seemed to say, "Did we really just experience what I think we experienced?" The answer in everyone's eyes was yes. They had all shared something truly extraordinary. Hiroshi bowed once more and then walked quietly toward the side of the stage. As he left, the applause started up again, though not as loudly as before. People simply could not let him go without expressing their appreciation one more time. The boy disappeared into the wings, leaving behind an audience that had been completely transformed by his music. They had entered Carnegie Hall as skeptics and critics. They were leaving as believers in the power of true genius and the magic of great art. As the applause finally died down, the judges knew they had an easy decision to make. There was no need for discussion or debate. What they had just witnessed was clearly the winner of the competition. In fact, it was more than just a winner. It was a performance that would be remembered for decades to come. Judge Richardson called for an emergency meeting of the judging panel. The 5 judges gathered in a small room backstage, but their conversation was brief. All of them were still emotional from what they had just heard. All of them knew that Hiroshi had not just won the competition. He had redefined what they thought was possible. "I have been judging competitions for 40 years, said Judge Richardson, his voice still shaky with emotion. "I have never heard anything like what we just witnessed. That boy is not just talented, he is a once-in-a-generation musical genius." Judge Martinez nodded in agreement. "I have performed this same piece with major orchestras around the world," she said. "I know how difficult it is. What that child just did should not be possible at his age. But he did it, and he did it perfectly." Professor Williams was still shaking his head in amazement. "I need to completely rethink everything I thought I knew about musical development," he said. "That performance has changed my understanding of what children can achieve." Mrs. Chen spoke for all of them when she said, "We are not just giving him first place. We are witnessing the beginning of what could be one of the greatest musical careers of our time." The judges decided to announce the results immediately, rather than making the audience wait. They knew that everyone in the hall was thinking the same thing they were thinking. There was no suspense about who had won. When Judge Richardson walked back onto the stage to announce the results, the audience became quiet with anticipation. But many people were already smiling because they knew what he was going to say. "Ladies and gentlemen," Judge Richardson began, his voice carrying clearly through the hall, "in my many years of judging musical competitions, I have never been more certain about a decision. The winner of this year's Carnegie Hall Young Artist Competition is Hiroshi Tanaka from Japan." The audience erupted in applause again, though this time it was mixed with cheers and shouts of approval. Everyone had expected this result, but hearing it officially announced made it feel real and final. But Judge Richardson was not finished. He raised his hand to quiet the audience because he had more to say. When the hall became quiet again, he continued with words that surprised everyone. "I need to make a public apology," he said, his voice heavy with emotion. "When young Hiroshi first walked onto this stage, I made assumptions about him based on his appearance and his age. I was wrong, and I am deeply ashamed of my initial reaction." The audience listened in surprised silence. It was unusual for a judge to make such a personal statement during an award ceremony. "That young man has taught me a lesson about prejudice and assumptions that I will never forget." Judge Richardson continued. "He has reminded me that true talent recognizes no boundaries of age, nationality, or background. I am humbled by what I have witnessed tonight, and I am grateful for the lesson in humility that Hiroshi has given me." When the judge finished speaking, the audience applauded him for his honesty and courage. It takes a strong person to admit their mistakes in public, especially someone in his position of authority and respect. Hiroshi was brought back onto the stage to receive his award. He looked very small standing next to the tall judges, but his presence seemed to fill the entire hall. When Judge Richardson handed him the trophy, the judge also did something unexpected. He bowed to the young boy, showing his deep respect. The other judges also bowed to Hiroshi, acknowledging that they had just witnessed something far greater than a typical competition performance. The boy accepted their respect with the same quiet grace he had shown throughout the evening. When Hiroshi was given the microphone to make an acceptance speech, his words were simple but moving. "Thank you very much," he said in his careful English. "I want to thank my grandmother who taught me to love music. I want to thank my mother and father who worked so hard to bring me here. And I want to thank my village in Japan where everyone helped make this dream possible." He paused for a moment and then added, "Music is a gift that should be shared with everyone. Tonight I was able to share my gift with all of you. Thank you for listening with your hearts." His words brought tears to many eyes in the audience. Here was this remarkable young artist who had just delivered one of the greatest performances in the hall's history, and he was using his moment of triumph to thank others and talk about sharing his gift. After the ceremony, something unprecedented happened. Usually the audience leaves quickly after a competition ends, but tonight many people stayed in their seats, as if they were not ready to return to the ordinary world outside Carnegie Hall. The music critic who had been planning to write a routine review was already on his phone with his editor. "You need to hold the front page," he said excitedly. "I just witnessed the discovery of the century. This story is going to be huge." His article, published the next morning, would introduce Hiroshi to the world. The headline read, "8-year-old Japanese prodigy delivers performance for the ages at Carnegie Hall." The article described not just the performance, but also the transformation of the audience from skepticism to amazement. The story was picked up by newspapers and television stations around the world. Within days, Hiroshi's performance was being discussed in music schools and concert halls everywhere. Video recordings of the performance, made by audience members on their phones, were shared millions of times on social media. Music schools and teachers began reaching out to Hiroshi's family, offering scholarships and opportunities. Famous conductors and orchestras invited him to perform with them. Record companies wanted to sign him to contracts. But perhaps the most meaningful recognition came from his fellow competitors. The other young musicians who had performed that night all sought him out to congratulate him and to tell him how much his performance had inspired them. Emma, the 12-year-old who had been nervous about following his act, told him that his performance had motivated her to practice harder and reach higher than she had ever thought possible. David, the 17-year-old who had expected to win, thanked Hiroshi for showing him what true musical artistry looked like. The impact of Hiroshi's performance extended far beyond that one night. The video recordings were used in music schools to show students what was possible with dedication and love for music. His story became an inspiration to young musicians around the world who faced obstacles or doubts about their abilities. Judge Richardson kept his promise to remember the lesson Hiroshi had taught him. He became known for being more open-minded and encouraging toward young performers, especially those who came from humble backgrounds. He often told the story of the night when a small boy from Japan taught him not to judge by appearances. The other judges were similarly affected. They all became advocates for finding and nurturing talent wherever it might be found, regardless of a student's background or circumstances. Years later, when Hiroshi had become one of the world's most celebrated pianists, he would often speak about that night at Carnegie Hall. He would talk about how the audience's initial skepticism had not discouraged him, because his grandmother had taught him that music speaks for itself. "If you play with truth and love," he would say, "people will hear that truth and love, no matter what they expect or assume about you." The Carnegie Hall performance became a turning point not just for Hiroshi, but for everyone who witnessed it. It reminded them that genius can appear anywhere, that assumptions can be dangerous, and that music has the power to change hearts and minds in an instant. Most importantly, it proved that when talent, hard work, and love come together, the results can be truly magical. Hiroshi had shown the world that age is just a number, that background doesn't determine potential, and that music is indeed a universal language that speaks directly to the human heart. The small boy from a Japanese village had walked onto the stage as an unknown. He left as a legend, and everyone who heard him play that night left with their own hearts and minds forever changed by the power of his extraordinary gift.